I also have this view of, what I call taking Frankenstein to soccer practice. When you're building these applications, you think about the fun and the excitement of you built something and it's, ragtag, but you don't think about somebody has to maintain it, somebody has to add features to it. That's the problem, I think, in some technology companies, that everybody wants to start this little thing, but they don't want to continue it.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Mark Sherwood. Mark is the Chief Information Officer of Wolters Kluwer, a professional information solutions, software, and services business based in the Netherlands that earns nearly 6 billion euros annually. Mark's been in his role since December of 2024. He's helped guide the company's cloud and artificial intelligence transformations, both of which commenced before his arrival, but have accelerated during his tenure. He notes that his efforts have been aided by the fact that his is a company with almost no shadow IT and an appetite for innovation. This transformation is all the more remarkable when one considers that the company is 187 years old. Mark's had prior tech executive roles at Microsoft, Nuance Communications, Symantec, and Cisco. Mark, welcome to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate the invite.
Well, Mark, I thought we'd begin with Wolters Kluwer, the company that you helped to lead. It's a complex multinational organization, and I'd love to have you perhaps provide a little bit of an overview of the business that you're in.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Wolters Kluwer has been around for 187 years. And, I did actually look it up. And when the company started, Edgar Allan Poe was still alive. So it gives you a view into exactly how old the company is. And it started out, roots as a publishing company and grew into, sort of a larger holding company where it had a lot of different acquisitions over the years. But a lot of it, focused on the publishing area and certainly building up intellectual property. And, it's really obviously transformed over the years, and we could chat about that. But basically, the products themselves is basically separated into sort of 5 divisions. So there's healthcare, legal, tax, finance, and then corporate performance. So it's basically where, I think what we say is subject matter expertise meets technology and innovation. So it's basically bringing together this tremendous amount of intellectual property and content that, you would have found, years ago, maybe in Edgar Allan Poe days, in books. And, we've continued to build on that level of subject matter expertise and content. And then now making it, from a product standpoint, much easier to access, get better information, get it much more quickly, get it much more robustly, have it tailored to how you want it. But that's the sort of the product suite as the company moves forward.
A great overview. Thank you for that. And talk a bit about your role as Chief Information Officer, a role that you took on in December of 2024. Talk about your purview as CIO, if you would.
Sure. So I think I'd say it's basically sort of a combination of 3 teams. So it's the technology part of IT. So it's, what people would probably expect from a CIO role. It is the, infrastructure hosting organization, networking, all the rest of those pieces that are typically included in sort of the infrastructure bucket. It's, business applications, business systems, enterprise applications, again, it goes by different names, but it's basically running, all the applications that are used throughout the businesses. And then, certainly from again, some people call it end user services. We call it workplace technology, but it's basically providing out all the internal customer, the devices, the access, the rooms, anything, the phones, anything that touches the end user, that level of responsibility. So that's basically one bucket. The next bucket is the global information systems team. So if you figure, it's a security team, it's the CISO of the organization. And the last team is comprised of what we call BRMs, which are business relationship managers. And I've had teams like that in the past. They weren't called BRMs, but I think it's great, and I think it's a really wise thought process because it really helps bridge the gap between the businesses and the technology. And I always think in a lot of companies, there's sort of a gulf there that says you speak one language or the other. And this is a team of people who really are fluent in both. So they understand the business. They're really treated, I think, as part of the business. They're part of typically their leadership teams. I'm jealous because they get to go to all their parties too. So they get hopefully a little bit of fun in there. And they also understand the IT side, the technology side of the house. So it does a very nice job of getting us more I think, relevant to the business as opposed to again, you and I've talked about it before. I always hate to think of IT as sort of the trolls that live under the bridge. They don't come out in the daytime. They hide and they aren't. They don't want to work with people. They just want to work with technology. Not that this team is at all like that, but I think it really helps drive the sort of relationship strength between business and the technology segments.
Given the diversity of the business that you described a few moments ago, I can understand the rationale and frankly the power of having people responsible for those and interacting in the ways you described. That makes a lot of sense. I wanted to also, I was fascinated. You and I had a recent conversation where you talked about how the company has gone from being a publishing holding company to an operating company to a tech-centric company. And even as you described the business a few moments ago, you talked about technology as being sacrosanct,
Yes.
key element of the description of the business itself. And I know some of this transformation predates your arrival to the company, but I wonder if you could talk a bit about that metamorphosis that has happened and how you even define being a tech-centric organization.
It's surprising to me to see a company that had sort of maybe a little bit more humble roots to have made the kind of transformation this company has. And I have to be honest, I knew of Wolters Kluwer, before I came and joined here. I knew about them mostly through the healthcare standpoint because the company I had worked at prior to Microsoft had the majority of the revenue of the company came from their healthcare, and it's probably the main reason why they were purchased by Microsoft. So, but I didn't realize that Wolters Kluwer had made that much, I'd say, progress in terms of where the company is and where they've gone from a technology standpoint. So if I look at, obviously I can't speak realistically to much more than, back to December when I joined, but I have heard and seen a lot of the history. And I think that the amount of change that's gone through the organization, and I'll say, I think probably looking back maybe over the last 20 years and maybe even more specifically, like over the last 10, the company really they brought together an organization called Global Business Systems, GBS, and the team as a whole has really driven a tremendous amount of technology through the organization. So what happened is there were decisions made that instead of continuing to operate as a holding company where you have a division leader over each of these 5 divisions, they decided to pull out more of the horizontal functions that you typically see in more of a technology company where you pull out finance, you pull out HR, you pull out IT, and more, the most recent one has been pulling out all of the development, the product development engineering organization out into these horizontals. So it's helped drive it much more from this sort of horizontal services perspective, so that they're looking at it now with the ability to say, we're now providing services to all those businesses, hopefully equally, and providing the same level of the SLAs, across all the divisions equally, as opposed to saying, we focus on one or the other. But I think the willingness to change, and again, we've talked about, I think in the past, Peter, that technology is always a big part of that change, but it's the people. That's what makes the difference whether the change actually sticks or not. And the culture here is so, it's one thing to call a company like risk averse. It's another thing to call it like they accept risk. This company, in my experience so far, has been like they almost chase after risk, saying like not risk in a bad way, but saying that, like, I really want change. Let's go after. It's something I really haven't seen as much in a lot of the technology companies that I've worked for. This company is just like sort of, what's next? Bring it on. Let's make something better, faster, stronger. So I think that part of the secret sauce of what has gotten the company to where it is over this relatively short period of time, 10 years isn't short, but in a 187-year journey, it's a short portion of that, to get it to a stage where it really has just been so impactful. And I just feel like the team is like sort of what's next? How do you drive it? So I think the technology, is like certainly keeping up with it. A lot of times I think companies and certainly, IT organizations can always be trying to push the technology, but sometimes don't focus enough, I think, on the human change management. But I think this company's done a really good job of really focusing on both. And I think it's part of the secret of the sort of success of getting out of sort of the old world of, I'm sure, they had printing presses, whatever it took to print books back in the day, to really where they are is, to me, very much of a technology company today.
That's extraordinary. I mean, it's a remarkable story. In some ways, made all the more remarkable, Mark, considering the fact that you have an executive team that resides in different continents. This
Yes,
is a Dutch company, after all.
it
You
is.
reside in Boston, Massachusetts. You're an executive vice president. Peers of yours are littered across the globe.
All
And
over.
one might think that the complexity of the different cultures, not talking company cultures,
Yes.
country cultures, might themselves lead to a degree of conservatism as the meeting of those cultures happen. Maybe I would be interested in your own assessment as somebody on this side of the Atlantic who works with so many people in other parts of the world as peers, how that maybe even contributes positively as a result of the many cultures that are mixing together.
Yeah. I think as much as when I joined, I thought the exact what you just mentioned, Peter, I thought, how is this really going to turn out with, again, dealing with, and I mean, I think every country probably has a certain set of its own cultures, right? And it as the way they deal with each other and the way I mean, not languages and stuff, but just the way they interact and such. And I have to be honest, I sort of expected it was going to be maybe more challenging than it is, but I feel like the company has really rallied around we're one Wolters Kluwer, and we're going to continue. And I think there's a lot of face-to-face interaction. I mean, first off, we do a lot of meetings, Zoom or Teams or whatever, but there's also opportunities where we do get to be face-to-face, and I think it makes a big difference. And again, as much as we're all we live on the technology, every once in a while, it is nice just human to human to be able to have, an actual conversation. Obviously, you and I have met in person, which I certainly enjoyed. It sort of richens the conversation. I think some of the, I'd say traditionally, I think the Dutch are viewed, and they'll even say it typically, that they're viewed as being very open and honest. And, that's a nice way of saying, they'll tell you, you're an idiot to your face if they think you are. Hopefully, no one has said that to me yet. But they're those kinds of things are really, they joke about it. I mean, it's a very minor set of differences. I love the idea of the differences in the cultures, and we are, as you said, spread out all over the world. But I think to me, it brings a richness to the team where you get a lot of different viewpoints, and I think it's part of the culture. And I think part of our culture is always, you bring your authentic self to work. I want diversity. I mean, regardless of what certain things that are changing in the United States now, I don't care. I think diversity and inclusion is incredibly important, and I think the company is sort of foundational around that. And I think it allows and it sort of encourages people to be different, come up with a different point of view, come up with different ideas, come up with a different thought process. So I think it's been a huge advantage to the company. I mean, it's the first company I've worked at that is not essentially a U.S. based company, so it's based in the Netherlands. But to be honest, it doesn't feel so different. I mean, there's certain rules and regulations that we have to abide by, but for the most part, I'd say it doesn't, from my standpoint, it doesn't really feel any different. Except I do love the inclusion portion of it.
Fascinating, really, really interesting. I wanted to ask you a bit about some of the transformation that has transpired. You've talked a little bit about it, but I'd love to double click a little bit further into it. I know that you've noted to me in the past that the company's been on a rather major cloud journey. You also have noted it's not complete, but I wanted to talk a bit about where it has gone, what is left to do, and the foundation that you're setting as a result of the commitment to moving to the cloud.
Yeah. So I think the team saw early on how important and what a critical component I think the movement to the cloud. And they had a lot of data centers. I came from a company that when I started, they had 38 data centers, and I was like, oh my gosh, a company that size. This was the one before Microsoft. And I thought, wow, that's a lot of data centers, and we got it down to probably 7 or 8 by the time we'd been acquired by Microsoft. And I felt like, wow, that's quite an achievement. We all sort of patted. I mean, to be fair, I didn't do the work; the teams did all the work. But when I came in here and found out how many more this company had and how they'd also gotten it down to a very low and manageable number, all of a sudden I was like, I didn't feel so like incredible. Like I felt like, okay, I come in second in a 2-horse race sort of with the work we had done at Nuance. Even though I don't want to take anything away from the great work the team at Nuance did, but they recognized it early on. And I think one of the things that was really positive, they went in with a real strategy around a multi-cloud environment. At Nuance, we had focused more on Azure, And we'd had, some contracts in place there, but it was done specifically, one of the thought processes that we were getting closer to partnering with Microsoft, not necessarily the view of being acquired, but we were beginning to partner more closely with Microsoft. But here it's a very, we have quite a footprint in both AWS and Azure. And I think that the other thing, this team was very forward thinking about let's focus on containerization in the early days. Let's not, I mean, we all probably maybe experienced some of the era of lift and shift that said, this, I don't want to blame any specific CEOs, but some CEOs potentially could have said, let's get us to the cloud. We want to be able to report that we're 70% in the cloud. Yeah, you can pick it up from your data center and put it in somebody else's data center. And, it doesn't save you any money. Sometimes it probably costs more. But, there aren't necessarily huge advantages. I mean, maybe you're getting out of some tech debt you may have in some old data centers. But I think, in sort of with a lot of forethought and foresight, that the team here really did focus more on what's the right way to get to the cloud and what do we want to make sure we do from a DR, a disaster recovery standpoint, and a business continuity standpoint, to be able to look and say, we want to make sure that we're able to switch, not just switch regions in case, Azure goes down or in case AWS goes down, and, chances of big outages are rare, but they still happen in segments. But having a really robust strategy around how you provide a level of continuity, even if you do have problems with one cloud vendor, you're able to, quickly move to another. A lot of that, again, is due to the great work that's been done, I think, around the containerization efforts to be able to move things a little bit more easily. But yeah, I'm impressed with how the team thought through a lot of that instead of doing the easy, which would have been saying, again, pick our stuff up and drop it down into Azure's data center somewhere and, be done with it and call it, cloud migration to the cloud. It is, but it's maybe not the best or smartest way to do it. So this team really, they thought through it, I think, before they did much of the work.
That's really great. And you've also noted that, I mean, obviously by having such a commitment to the cloud, it sets a strong foundation for continuous innovation in ways perhaps that might be more difficult under different circumstances. And among the areas in which the organization is innovating, by the way, I was translating all you mentioned about the running towards risk as a desire to be innovative. Obviously, if you're innovating, by definition, you are taking some risk. You know that what you're pushing forward may or may not bear fruit, but you do so anyway. And so I know among the areas of innovation that have been focal for the company is, believe you mentioned to me that half the company's products leverage artificial intelligence in some sort of meaningful way. And I wonder your own thought process about how it's become so immersive at the scale that you have in a business like yours.
Yeah. It's interesting, Peter, because when, we worked at Nuance, and the company was really an AI, and maybe one of the reasons why it was attractive to Microsoft, a company that leveraged, large language models from early days. I mean, years and years and years ago, back before anybody knew what AI stood for. It wasn't the cool or sexy thing. It was just like, it was a tool like anything else. You were like, it's a hammer. I don't get excited about using a hammer, I don't think. So it's been an interesting sort of journey, I think, to watch it. And how it's progressed, and of course the last few years, it's like last few years, last few months, weeks, days, hours. I mean, it just is, it's incredible where it is now. But I think, Wolters Kluwer really looked at it and said, how can we leverage this both from a product development standpoint, as well as how do users want to really access, some of our products? So a lot of it is helping to get the right information to people the quickest, most natural way, most accurate, time saving. You look and say in the old days, it'd be like, okay, here's a book. Somebody drops this massive technical journal off on your desk. It's 700 pages, and you got to flip through it and go through the index, like maybe we all used to do back a million years ago. But looking and saying, how do we get that same access to that one page or that one paragraph, particularly at things like healthcare, where you've got, obviously the amount of data out there is just astounding, but to be able to get to the data and not have to, in sort of the old days, which maybe wasn't that many years ago, where people would type in a query, now having, enabled with large language models and be able to use natural language, be able to do searches, getting more accurate, getting more specific. It's really about how do you get the information that you really want as quickly as possible? Because we feel very confident about the quality of the information we have with all the subject matter experts we have as part of the company and the quality of the tools. But the thing is, it's still difficult to find exactly what you want. And I'll say, you look at things like tax laws change, on a daily basis. Obviously, nowadays, probably more frequently than that. Obviously, a lot of changes going on. I think from a government perspective in terms of where things are going from a tax stage as well as legal. But getting access to that, and AI has really helped, from a product standpoint, allow our customers to get much more accurate data much more quickly, and not having to think about what sort of query do I want to ask. Again, natural language has provided us a lot of capabilities to get quickly what you want, and you get spoiled by it. Obviously, for anybody's listening out here, you get used to using AI, and it's hard to step away. Hopefully, we don't ever have to step away from it. Just summarizing things, even basic tasks, are just so much easier on so many things. Anyway, so it's sort of, I think, again, like I said, that sort of subject matter expertise and content and merging it with sort of technology and innovation. And I think that's where sort of we sit.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing that perspective as well. And I wanted to also ask you a bit about a company that, like yours, that is historically so steeped in the development and leveraging of intellectual property.
Yes.
The sanctity of IP has been threatened by generative AI, especially. There's been a lot of pontification as to whether IP laws need to change as a result of the way in which intellectual property is ingested and leveraged by generative AI. How do you think about the balance between being forward-thinking in the manner that you just described, generally speaking, while also safeguarding a company like Wolters Kluwer's intellectual property?
I'll say it is something we think about and talk about probably daily. It really is. It is always a potential threat, and I don't want to make it sound like it's just Wolters Kluwer. It's everybody out there, right? Is the ease at which bad actors, people in general, could get access to the intellectual property, because that's the true value, I think, of what the company brings is, again, subject matter expertise and the content, and protecting that. I'm sure even in the older days, history, it was important, but I think it's even more important now, just because of the fact of, this is all, 90x% of our business is all digital now. I mean, we have a very, very small aspect of printing still in some places that have some requirements around it, but it's a minor portion of the business. But it's, again, everything being digital just opens up to a whole new world of how difficult it is to get some level of control about that. So it is a serious topic that, we never take it for granted that it's safe and all those things. I mean, it is a daily, probably nearly daily discussion that we have to make sure that we feel we are being both ethical use of AI, because obviously AI can do weird things every once in a while, but to use it ethically, but also to make sure that we're doing everything we can to try and protect that IP. I mean, that's the sort of the crown jewels of the company at this stage. So we do want to make sure we keep it as high priority as we go forward.
Makes sense. Yeah, critical that balance is struck. You mentioned earlier a point that I also wanted to return back to. I remember a way that you've once put it to me was the silicon-based systems are easy to change compared to the carbon-based ones. That is to say, it's people change, it's cultural change that can be some of the most difficult to enact. And you've already begun to talk about what an extraordinary culture yours is, the culture you found last December that you've immersed yourself in since. And
Yes.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, as you think about, again, the advances towards continued realization of being a tech-centric organization, but also an AI-forward organization, how you continue to think about tuning the culture, and it sounds like it is an organization that is primed for that tuning, given its general orientation. But other advice you would have to others by extension who might wish to follow in the footsteps of what you've described?
Yeah, it sounds like something I would say about the carbon and the silicon, because it sounds sort of geeky. I probably did say that. you know, again, as people, technology people, again, the silicon-based systems are they're easy, right? That you make a change and then it basically stays that way. The challenge with the carbon ones, as you sort of mentioned, is they're convinced one day and not convinced, later that day or the next day. I think that, one of the things that I see that the company has done really well, and I'll say some of the other companies I've worked at, we've tried to do the same kind of thing, which is making sure that everybody is along for the journey. If it looks as though this is, an IT initiative that's driven by IT and we're doing it and nobody needs to know why, but it's the right thing to do. It's like, take your medicine and don't ask what kind of medicine it is. I see that doesn't work well and it doesn't fly. And I feel like the business needs to, so there's some things that will be requests coming from the business side saying we would like these kinds of things, but there's some initiatives that are also driven by IT that have to be explained back to the business. And I think if people stop doing that and say, sort of, trust me, it's good for you, I don't think that's a recipe for success. I think it's bringing them along in the journey, getting their input, keeping them involved all the way through the process, letting them get their hands in it for, beta testing, for user acceptance testing as we go forward, to feel like this is all of us trying to make this change and we all recognize it. I do see sometimes when technology companies get driven too much by technology, that I think the people can feel like, I never got a say in this, and I still like the old way we did it. And everybody, we're all, I think we're all probably guilty of, we get comfortable and it gets friendly, and you're like, I've been using this system for 10 years and I'm happy. And you're used to all its quirks, even though it has quirks. Anything, even if it's better, it's still different. And there's always a sort of a human emotion about, I don't like it, I don't want to do it, and go, but you got to give it a try. And I think, again, if you get them involved from the very beginning, communication, almost over communicate to me. I would rather err on too much communication than not enough, but getting them feeling like they're involved in the process, also involved in the decision. I mean, if people feel like you're getting it sort of forced on them, I still think there's a natural human view of, I don't like this. And if we can help, partner with them and bring them along. That's, again, why I think the business relationship manager role is so key and so important, because it really helps tie the sort of the organizations, the business side and the technology side together.
Yeah, keen observations and good advice as well. Appreciate you sharing it, Mark. You also have mentioned to me that this is one of the first organizations, if not the first organization, that you've had that does not really have meaningful shadow IT. I found that so interesting, especially given, again, how diverse and complex the business is. I mean, you're asleep as the CIO when business starts in Europe, for example. They could be operating in the shadows for several hours before you started your day. All kidding aside, talk a bit about your diagnosis of that, why that has proven to be the case, and certainly a great position to be in, still in the relatively early months of your tenure.
Yeah, I think you and I have talked about it before. I feel very lucky. I've been at companies, I won't say which ones or anything, but I've been at some that have a real problem. And I always feel like the companies that have a lot of shadow IT, it's basically a reflection of some other issues. That to me is not the big problem. The biggest problem is that I have to step back and go, why do we have shadow IT? And it's generally because there's not a good relationship between the business teams and the IT organization, or the development teams and the IT organization. They're doing it because they feel like either I tried to talk to IT and they wouldn't listen, or they don't know what they're doing and I'm going to do it myself. And I think IT as a technology group has to be able to show, we did listen, we do want to partner with you, we do want to build what you're asking for, we do want to do the best thing for the company, so that the other organizations, whether it's the development organization or whether it's the business organization, say, okay, we trust you. At the end of the day, it generally isn't a funding, like a budget issue, because if there's shadow IT, somebody's still paying for them, whether they're employees or whether they're contractors or consultants or whatever. You're paying for these people one way or the other, whether they're in IT or whether they're in the business or the product teams. So I think one of the things, again, as the company started to pull out the functions from these divisions and made them into these sort of horizontal pieces, I think they really focused on saying, we're all in this. This is something we're all going to agree to. And I think as it's happened, it really pulled out the vast majority. And I would think at least from the leaders that I've talked to, saying there really isn't like, shadow finance or shadow I mean, I don't know how you do shadow HR, but either way, like product development, it really is, these horizontals were done quite well and very firmly and a very a high level of sort of being complete in terms of how they moved forward on some of these things. So I can't say what the company used to be like, but it was one of the questions I actually asked during the sort of interview process was, all across the company, how much shadow IT do you see? And the general response was, I don't really think there's much of any of it. And it really, again, I feel lucky because I feel like everything I was told sort of in the interview process, it really is true. I mean, people were 100% honest, which again, I really value that as nobody wants to come in and feel like you were sort of sold a bill of goods to go like, oh, I know we said that, but that's not the way it works. I never felt like that here. I mean, I always felt like they really had done a good job of creating these horizontal functions. And I'd say even today, after, it's been 4 months or so, very little, if any, I mean, really kind of shadow IT here. So it was exactly sort of as advertised, which was great. And I appreciate everybody's honesty.
What a fantastic situation to find yourself in.
Yes.
You've alluded to through our conversation some of your past stops, and to add a little bit more color beyond what you already have. You worked at very tech-centric organizations prior to this one. I'm thinking of Cisco and Symantec. You mentioned Nuance Communications, which was acquired by Microsoft, for which you then worked for a time as well. These are each organizations where the preponderance of tech talent isn't only found in IT, it is littered across the organization, perhaps in a different way, in a different concentration, or I should say a different dissemination than would be the case at a place like Wolters Kluwer. And I wonder how your experience in firms like that have colored the way in which you think about leading technology in a firm like yours, in so many ways different, of course, in some fundamental ways to the ones I've just described. Any thoughts there?
I think having companies that grew up as a technology company, there's pros and cons. I think the pro is people tend to be quite tech savvy. I mean, I think they know. I mean, at Microsoft and at Cisco and some of the other companies, they just are more aware of the technology and stuff. And I think that it can be also a downside because sometimes in technology companies, again, there is a bit more of that sort of shadow X function that says, wait, I could do a good job. I'm in a different group outside of product development, but by gosh, I think I could build some products or technology, or even worse. I mean, I think from an IT, hitting home, they're like, I think I could do some of these things. And sometimes they probably have the talent, but again, it creates these sort of islands of, I think they have the right intentions, but again, it creates a level of, I think, of challenge. And, I can't remember if I told you this one, but I also have this view of, what I call taking Frankenstein to soccer practice. And it was a thought process of the creation of Frankenstein. It's, not safe for digging up dead bodies, right? So I don't support that. I want to go on record saying I'm not a fan of that. But,
good to hear it.
The fact of, bringing something together, bringing life into it and go, boom, I mean, it's exciting. It's fun. It's like writing an application. People are like, I can totally do this over the weekend. The downside is sooner or later, Frankenstein starts to grow up and you got to maintain Frankenstein and Frankenstein, more features and capabilities and such. And all of a sudden, Frankenstein wants to go to soccer practice because Frankenstein's getting older. And you go like, nobody wants to take Frankenstein to soccer practice. And I think when you're building these applications, you think about the fun and the excitement of you built something and it's, ragtag, but you don't think about somebody has to maintain it. Somebody has to add features to it. That's the problem, I think, in some technology companies, that everybody wants to start this little thing, but they don't want to continue it. And then you get into this, again, sort of shadow X function. What I've seen here is that there's an understanding and a recognition of the need of the technology, but people more are, let's leave that to the teams that really own that, right? They've got more of a process in place. They know how to support these things. They understand, feature ads. They've got the infrastructure sorted out. They know where these are hosted. They've got the communications plan in place. Being able to take advantage of a process that exists, I think, saves us from some of that soccer practice and Frankenstein. So.
I love the analogy. That is a new one for me. I wanted to ask you also, as you think about the future, Mark, what other trends come to mind that particularly excite you? What else are you starting to investigate, either personally and or professionally?
Yeah. You know, AI, I mean, it's two simple letters. It amazes me. And everybody, I mean, obviously that's not a world earth shattering thing. I mean, it's just how much it changes like on a daily basis every day, right? I think the flip side, of course, is the how bad actors are changing. I mean, instead of being, sort of kids in their, mom's basement, with a hoodie on and hacking. I mean, now, obviously with well-funded nation states and the risks there. So it's sort of like a lot of things, a double-edged sword. Cool things are happening, and I think it's fascinating as to where things are going. I also look at, I mean, obviously, agentic AI, I mean, the changes there, the increase, I mean, going from scratching the surface on AI to do simple things to all of a sudden, basically agents of AI to the point where, I mean, how far off are we from essentially AI employees? I mean, it's not just an agent that does one function. It's almost somebody that gets like a badge. I mean, badges will be outdated by then, but a badge and an employee number, and they probably won't get a place to sit. But the idea that it's changing so fast that it's almost different as to how we're going to define what a quote an employee is. And I'm not here to say we should eliminate people by any stretch, but it's amazing to me how quickly we went from sort of the concept of large language models and now you could simplify things to agentic AI, and then sort of what's next. Again, I sort of, my view is it's going to be the AI employee, right? I feel like we're not that far off of those things. I think the like quantum computing is also fascinating and also scary at the same time to say, how much of our every company's security is based on technology of today. And all of a sudden, when we hit the point where, quantum computing is available to the general public, how much that changes just the way we think about things. So that's another one of those areas that I'm really fascinated by. And every year I hear like, it's people are predicting it's coming sooner rather than later. And it used to be like, a year ago it was like, oh, it's 10 years off. And then Microsoft, puts out, and a couple other companies, hey, we've got our first chips, getting ready and go, now it's like people are saying 5 years or 3 years, and the speed at which things are going, that one is even scary, great, exciting, but also like scary from a company standpoint. We think it's in a simpler level about how we stop bad actors from gaining access to our companies and our intellectual property and such, and how that changes what our defenses are, I think, and our thought process around. So we've already started to have discussions on that, even though it's a ways away, but just, we don't want to be caught. We're hoping the tools that protect catch up as fast as, some of the people that are out there using it. So I would say that maybe many of us probably remember the days of big data, right? CEOs were like, we need big data. I don't know what big data is, but by gosh, we need to have it. I do see a resurgence in maybe the importance of this sort of a data strategy and a data governance and how important that is to get your arms around it. Different than the days of, one big data warehouse. There were some companies I won't mention that used to specialize in that. But more of this sort of data fabric and understanding where the single source of truth is and getting our arms around that, making sure that it doesn't all have to be in one safe house, but go like that. I just don't think that's the way companies work anymore. But I'd say that's another area of interest, is making sure that we have, because, data to me is sort of the lifeblood of the company. And I always feel like there's probably more that we could be doing, even simple things like data definitions. What is a customer? We work for weeks on, I mean, not here, but at other companies, trying to just define something simple, in terms of data. So I think there's another element there that is always worth another thought to say, are we doing what we need to do from a data standpoint? Because again, everything AI models, they're only as good as what they get from a training standpoint. You feed them great data and they turn out great stuff. You feed them questionable data and you get what you get. So
great points. Great points. There are aspects of your response that speak to the promise of technology, as well as the necessity to be fully cognizant of the potential risks of what you're putting in place as well. There's always
absolutely
that balance between those. I wanted to also ask you before I let you go, Mark, as somebody who has, I know, a broad intellectual diet. Anything you have recently read, watched, and or listened to that you would recommend to others?
Mustafa Suleiman, who is joined Microsoft as I think, CEO of Microsoft AI. He wrote a book called The Coming Wave. I would recommend that to anybody. It's first of all, it's pretty deep. I mean, wow. I met him one time. I'm sure he doesn't remember it, but yeah. I mean, I gotta be honest. He's operating on a different plane. I mean, I met a lot of smart people in my life. He's got to be close to the top up there. He's one sharp guy. But it's about. I think it's a very balanced view of where AI is going, from a pros and a cons, how it has and how it will impact society. It's very high level. I mean, there's probably, a million, probably more than that, AI books. I haven't read them all. That one really is, I thought was quite good. So I would recommend that if anybody's interested in those kinds of things. Book wise, this will probably sound corny, but I'll say it anyway. I read a book and then it got turned into a movie, and I watched the movie, and like anything else, people say the book is better, and the book was probably a little bit better, but the movie was still good. And it's sort of from a weird left field place. It was called The Boys in the Boat, and it came out as a movie, and I think George Clooney directed it. If I remember, if that's wrong, then I apologize, but I think that's right. It's a really nice, I won't spoil any of it, but it's a really nice story about how you build teamwork, setting goals, what it takes to get there, how you need everybody together. So it's sort of like a non-technical, but how, again, I talked a bunch about how important the human side is. So there's my technology side with the book, but my more human side, I enjoyed it just because of what it takes to try and achieve whatever your goals are in your life, and how important teams are, and that you can't in general, you can't do things by yourself. I mean, you need some level of teamwork in order to get things done. I thought it had a pretty deep message to it. Anyway, I liked it. So anyway, it's a personal thing, but I enjoyed it just from the sort of non-technical aspect of it, and then how much you read into it to say, yeah, you really, to do great things, you really do need great teams. And how you get people to, even if they're, they don't initially work together well, how you sort of bring people together and focus them on a singular goal, and people work hard to, if they buy into the goal, they'll work hard to get to the goal. So I always like that aspect of it. So
and I also love the underdog aspect of it as well.
Yeah. Same. Yeah. I mean, we don't want to spoil it for other people if they haven't seen the movie or something, but yeah, absolutely. Like the yes, underdog. I don't want to spoil it, but yes, the underdog aspect of it is. So maybe you've read or seen the movie too. It was good. I enjoyed it. Yeah, really
terrific. And for those who are interested in a primer, episode 800 of this podcast, it featured Mustafa Suleiman talking about that very book. A great suggestion. Really great suggestion.
Yeah, he's something else. He's a smart man.
Indeed. Well, as are you, Mark Sherwood, as represented through this conversation. I appreciate you taking time with me today. Talking about your experience so far, several months into your current role, while also pulling threads from your past as to how that's impacted the way in which you lead now. And wonderful also to get a lens into what you see coming and what excites you as you look to the future also. I really appreciate the conversation, Mark.
I very much appreciate the opportunity to do this. Obviously, you and I have had a number of chats in the past, and it was a pleasure to meet you in person. It's always nice to see you again, Peter. So again, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.